All right. So what I wanted to talk about today, and I also wanted to record it for your YouTube channel, was the results from the first quarter-ish, so basically the first 3 months of the fiscal year. And I was going to talk specifically about your performance to objectives in this, and then also a little bit about the new requirements in the annual report. So the first thing to know is the numbers look really super good. That your objective for the year is to have 155 consumers served, and you're already at 128. So that's 83% of it. You're only a third of the way through the year. So that's great. 22 youth consumers you already have served, and your objective for the year is 20. So you've already exceeded that with 2/3 of the year left. And 61 consumers employed, and the objective was 60. So you've already exceeded that with 2/3 of the year left. So all of that is fantastic. Now, I do check up on you, and you might think, what? You check up on us? But when numbers are this good, I do, and not just me, but any evaluator is going to go and look and say, could this be a mistake? And you, not that you aren't all completely honest on the side of the angels, but everybody makes mistakes. So one of the things I checked was to see that the employment, the status 26, which is successful closure, isn't double counted. Like maybe somebody was counted as status 22 last year, and now they're all status 26, a successful closure last year, and accidentally they were counted again this year. That did not happen. The data was 100% accurate. So everybody I looked as being a successful closure last year dropped off the data, as they should, unless they showed up again as status 32, a success post-employment. So the data was completely valid as far as those successful closures. And for people listening to this that don't know what a status 26 is, for someone to be closed out successfully in vocational rehabilitation, they have to have been employed for 90 days. So then the other thing, and again, I do check up on you, I looked at the people who are status 22, which is they're employed, but they are not yet closed out. Because something, not you, and you're probably thinking, why would she do this? Why would she think that we could possibly be dishonest? But, people who are dishonest don't have it tattooed on their forehead. So I do check to see maybe you just showed all these people as employed, like at the end of the fiscal year, and 3 weeks later, they weren't employed anymore. But that was not true at all. In fact, and you're probably thinking, well, of course we knew this, but like I said, I check all of these things. So the consumers that were showed as employed, which is a status 22, they're working, but they haven't been closed out in those 90 days. When I looked them up 120 days later, 4 months later, they were predominantly closed out, a status 26, which they should have been, or they were closed out and receiving post-employment services, again, as they should have been. So everything I looked at validated that those 61 people employed really were legitimately employed. And I looked at the 97 people employed last year, same thing. So that was really good to see. It's what I hope to see. And actually, this happens more often than you might think, really, with evaluations. The results were actually better than reported, because when I looked at those consumers that were in status 22 that were employed, there were actually 9 of them who'd been employed longer than the 90 days. And so those, I know I emailed you all about that, got moved to successful closure to status 26. So not only were you not over-reporting how good your results were, you're actually under-reporting it. And now I trust that all those, because I emailed each of you personally, that all of those are closed out. So your results will look even better. I also was very interested to see how successful people were that were showed as that status 22. And 92% of those who were employed in, not just in 2021, because it's actually better than this, because there's 92 employed in 2021, we're still employed in January 2022, but that is 92% of them who were employed at the end of the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year. In other words, 92% of those people employed on October 1st were still employed in January. So that is also really good. It's showing what the Rehabilitation Services Administration wants to see, which is not only you're putting people to work, but they're staying on those jobs. And all of this is really good because there's a reason I checked for this, because an unsuccessful program would be the opposite of all these things. So this is great. So then I wanted to look over time, because your program has been there a long time. Now, I decided not to go all the way back to 2008. Actually, in the database, we have data all the way back to 2008. But, you know, things have changed over time. So I looked first at the last 10 years, and then I broke things down in 5-year intervals. And what you can see is, now I think this drop here, and Rick, you might remember, there was a year when you were on order of selection. Remember when the program ran out of funds? And I think it was about this time. Do you recall?
It was right before COVID, I believe.
So it might have been this drop here.
Yeah, because I think Tara was here then too.
Yeah. So what you can see is that there was a larger number of consumers being served. So this is the number of closures based on the year the person applied. And then the percent is gone way up over time. So back in 2015, it was about 40%. And I remember when we did this last grant talking about, oh, I think you could do 50%, and oh, it's going to be a push. And then we did the next proposal and said, I think you could do over 50%, but it's going to be a push. And here, now this right now, it shows that you're at 100% successful closure, but not to be pessimistic, but that's undoubtedly going to go down, because these are just the people who signed up this year. And so, of course, they've signed up within the last 4 months, some of them within the last, 2 weeks. So they haven't been closed out yet. So far this year, it's looking good. But if you look at last year, over 80% of closures were successful. So that's a big jump. Now, we've talked about some of the things that might contribute to that. Like one of them might be the big jump in the minimum wage in the area. But what you can see is it wasn't just last year. Over time, the percent of closures that are successful has been going up. So that's pretty cool to see. Now, when I was in graduate school, they always drilled into it that when you say percent, you should say percent of what? And again, I sound like I'm like this evil person back here going, what could they be doing wrong? But, it's a question you ask. Oh, the percentages are going up, but is it percent of a smaller number? Are they serving fewer people? Well, as you can see over here, hopefully I guess it's not showing up what I'm pointing to. But if you look further, so these are fiscal years. So the 2012 fiscal year, as you know, and I'm saying this for basically the benefit of people watching on video, but 2012 fiscal year goes from October 1st, 2012 to September 30th, 2013, and so on. So for those fiscal years, 2012, 13, and 14, you had 184 consumers and 45% of them got employed. And from the 2015 to 2017 fiscal year, you had more. You had 226 consumers and 42% of them got employed. For the next 3 fiscal years, the last 3, you had more consumers than ever. You had 249 people. And so these are people that signed up for Voc Rehab over those 3 fiscal years, and 58% of them got employed. So not only is the percentage employed getting up, the percentage, the number of people are going up. Now you might wonder, why do those numbers look lower, the 58% than the chart I showed? Because the chart I showed was only people who had a closure, right? So this number, for example, this 42% includes people who are not closed out. So 58% of people were employed, and you've got another 42%, many of them who are still in the program, they're still getting services. But what you are seeing is over time, the number of people getting employed is going up, the percentage getting employed is going up, and the number of people served is going up. So that is good all the way around. And you can see, I just showed it graphically in the trend, that over time, this is the total number served each year. So previously I had broken it down by time period, but over the last few years, particularly, the numbers are just going up. And of course, the reason that 2021 looks really small is that's only the first 4 months of the year. So you can expect that to be much higher. So these numbers are the new consumers, because of course you start every fiscal year with a rollover of people who are getting served at the end of the last fiscal year. You don't say, hey, it's September 30th, you're all out of here, everybody needs to sign up again. So every year you're getting more people. So the thing I've been trying to figure out for a very long time and have not been, oh, pardon? Oh. Can you hear me now? It said my internet was unstable.
Yeah.
And I don't even have the excuse of blizzard. All right, so one thing I've been trying to figure out for a long time is to identify if you can see certain people are more likely to have difficulty getting or keeping a job, then maybe you could intervene with those people sooner. And for years, I've been looking at these data, trying to come up with things from a quantitative perspective, and I have not found a lot of factors that predict. And I think I've mentioned this to you when I come into your offices and I look through the files, and often I'll be looking at something and this person has severe disability, and they have several children they have to get childcare for, and they have all of these barriers, and I think this person is really going to struggle getting a job. And then their father's got a job, they're working somewhere, they're doing great. So the one thing, there's a couple things that I've found that do predict, and one is if someone has a job when they come into the program, they're much more likely to have successful closure. So 76% of those had a job when they entered that were coming to get help keeping their job were successful. And that was compared to 34% who didn't have a job when they entered. So that is one big predictor. So you might want to think about that when you're working with folks who don't have a job, maybe keep a little more contact with them. The other thing that I found was that there's a definite relationship with education. So people who had less than a high school education, 37% of them had a successful closure. That is, they got a job and kept it for 90 days. And that over the last 10 years was 235 consumers. And again, we're only looking at people who actually had a closure. So we're not looking at those who are still receiving services. So 37% of those with less than a high school education had a successful closure. Now, 85% with a 4-year degree did, but that was only 13 people. But 63% of those with an associate's degree did. So basically, people have more education were more likely to have successful closure. Now, is that because those are the same people who are better at keeping commitments or have more skills or whatever? I mean, all these data tell you these are things that predict who's going to have successful closure. I am not, in fact, quite the contrary, saying, well, if they don't have a job when they come in, don't provide them services, or they don't have a high school education. But what I am saying is maybe you want to follow up with those folks a little more, just because you know that the odds are not in their favor. Now, one thing I thought, but I was wrong about, is I thought maybe those people with more education were more likely to have a job when they entered the program. So that's why they were more likely to be a successful closure, but that was not really true. So more education, more likely to have a successful closure, and if you have a job when you come in. And I thought the people who had a job who were more educated were going to have a job when they came in, and that's why, but no, they're two separate and distinct things. The consumers who had a substance abuse disorder or a learning disability were a little bit less likely to have a successful closure than a person who had diabetes or a person who had a physical disability or a person who had a mental illness. But those people with a substance abuse disorder were also less likely to have a job coming in. And again, these data don't tell you why, they just tell you what predicts. There was something very recently, a lot of press on the difficulty people have if they have a felony conviction or if they have a substance abuse history of getting employed. So again, that just might be something you want to look at, but this was not a huge difference. It wasn't like the big difference between people by education or the big difference by having a job coming in. If they had a substance abuse disorder, they were a little bit less likely to get employed.
Driver's license is another big one.
Oh, I didn't look at that. That's a good point. And that would be related to a substance abuse disorder a lot of times because you lose your license.
Yeah.
I looked to see if there was a difference in successful closure by age, because you cover a really broad age range, right? From 16 to people in their 70s. No relationship at all, none. I looked to see if there was a difference between men and women. No relationship at all. So those were the things I found predicted and didn't predict whether people had a successful closure or not. And I think you might want to take those data and use them to just maybe, I say keep closer tabs on people, but maybe make more connections with people, or try to be a little bit more proactive and say somebody doesn't have a high school diploma, ask if they would like some assistance with filling out job applications, or take a little bit closer look at what they might say as their disability when they fill out the IPE, because I think it's difficult for people often to say they have a disability. And when they're asked, do you have trouble getting along with coworkers? And often those checklists on the IPE, people, oh, no, I don't. Well, if you have zero impediments to getting a job, then you don't qualify for voc rehab. And often people do have those impediments. They just don't want to say so. There's a very state. Okay.
A lot of times it takes the second or third meeting for them to open up a little more about that, some of those impediments.
There was a very famous psychologist many years ago who said, it will never be to somebody's credit to have attended a special school. And I know I taught developmental psychology for a long time. And when I would talk about gifted education, there's always people that raise their hand and go, oh, I was in gifted ed when I was young. But when I talked about special needs and kids with learning disabilities and kids with mental retardation, almost nobody ever raised their hand and said, oh, I rode the short bus to school, So yes, it's not something people want to talk about often.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes people think if they tell you that they have all these issues, and then you're going to think they can't work or whatever. Does that make sense? Like,
yes.
They'll say, oh no, I'm fine. I can do whatever. And
right.
Then when you explain, then all of a sudden they have, oh, this is wrong and that's wrong. And whatever. I think they say that because they think that that's what they're supposed to say.
Right. Sense. And like Rick said, if they don't know you very well, if I was meeting with somebody for the first time and they're asking me about personal things, I don't know you. But speaking of other good things, one of the things that I track is Referral Source. And you might wonder why. And the reason is because a lot of research has shown that one measure of how excellent a product or service is how likely consumers are to recommend it to their friends or family. And so you've probably gotten all those online surveys when it says, how likely are you to recommend Windows to your friends or family? But when I interview people, well, first of all, they're asked on the IPE, and this is in the data, how did you hear about the program? And as you can see, by far, the number one referral source is friends and family. And that's a really good thing, because you're not going to refer your friends to some program if you don't think it's good. And I can tell you, because I do call all those consumers that I ask you for their phone numbers for, and anybody who's listening to this, if I call you, please answer. I will text you first. I'm that lady from California that comes out and does the evaluation. I'm not a weirdo. I'm not selling you anything. So please answer my phone calls. But when I do interview people, I ask them more specifically, how did you hear about the program? And very often, those friends and family are former consumers. And they will say, oh, my sister, my brother, my aunt, my mom was in this program. And they said it was really good. And they often will mention a specific counselor. And Melissa really helped me out, or Rick really helped me out, or Tara was really helpful, they said. So they told me to go to the program. So that is a really good indicator of quality. And that's really good to see. Now, here's the consumers by year. This is something I am still working on, because this other category, not mentioning specific people, but I went in to see what the other was, and often it was just stuff that was misspelled. The number of ways people can spell scoliosis is amazing. So I'm going and editing that. But it does show that mental illness has increased over. So this chart on the right is all for the last 10 years. And the one on the left is just within the last 4.5 years, because this current fiscal year, of course, is just getting started. And there has been a larger increase in people with mental illness and substance abuse relative to physical disabilities or health. And I say specifically mental illness because if I say mental disorder, I think people might confuse that with like mental retardation or learning disabilities. But the big, and again, this is what I'm doing when I go through and look through your files. The big, looking at things more specifically, the big mental illnesses tend to be depression and anxiety. And people with those disorders, people with mental illnesses tend to be doing a little better at getting employed than people with substance abuse or learning disabilities. And they're also increasing as a percent of your consumers. It may be, there's again been a lot of press about with the current pandemic and the number of people who have passed away and all of that, that there's been a higher incidence of depression and anxiety nationwide. But just so you know, that is how things are changing. You're also, and again, I don't want to mention specific disorders on here, so we talk about that later. Some of these other, I'm going to be going in and recategorizing because they're not really other, they're just much lower incidence disabilities, so they weren't automatically put in a category. And like I said, some of them were just misspelled. So all of these things are good. So then the question is, could anything possibly be improved? And I know Rick's probably sitting there saying, you're never satisfied, are you? My niece used to live with us, and she was in college, and she got, I don't know, B+ average. And I said, well, that's good, but you could have gotten A in this, and you couldn't get A in that. And Samantha says, is outraged. And she says to Rhonda, my daughter, that's the best grades I've ever got in my life. Is your mother never satisfied? And Rhonda says, I can answer that. No. But there's always something you could do better. So the things that could be improved: attendance at consumer advisory council meetings. And I know that you all have been working on getting more people signed up for that. I would recommend getting additional consumers signed up. I know right now you have one person from each district, but maybe try and get an alternate or get more than one person signed up, just because, especially now, since you're doing such great work putting people to work, that consumer you have signed up may be working during those hours, especially since people are working at the casino and that. So attendance at consumer advisory council meetings. I know it's been tough with, social distancing and all, but that could be better. I do know you tried Zoom and you tried in person, but that's an area for improvement. Encouraging qualified individuals to pursue careers in STEM, medicine, business, or law. That is a new category on the annual report this last year. So that's one that has not been a big push because it hasn't, I think, partly been part of the evaluation. And now it is. So that's something I think you could pursue a little more. On the job training, again, you have funding for that. It was difficult in this last year with so many companies closed down and social distancing, but that might be an option for some of those individuals that either have multiple times come back for voc rehab services, or for individuals maybe who don't have a high school education that maybe need to upgrade their skills. So that's another possibility where you could maybe do a little more. And the other thing, transition services for youth. I noticed that you just recently started going back to the high schools because obviously they were closed for a while, so you couldn't go. And there are not a lot of youth getting transition services right now. So that might be the other area that you could improve. But overall, my evaluation would be that you are doing fantastic as far as performance objectives, and you should keep up all of the great work.